This week on the Destination Angler.
One technique that would certainly ring true with most of these successful anglers are, being very, very observant, following the hatches, but also casting to the rising fish. So since it's a easily accessible wade fishing system, you can take your time and spend a little bit of time observing and watching and say, okay, with this seam here, with this eddy, we got fish rising right there, casting to the risers with the right pattern. And then after that, switching it up and plying the water underneath with some nymphs.
Welcome to the Destination Angler Podcast, the podcast for anglers who travel. And I'm your host, Steve Haig. We go right to the source, the local guides and experts, to build your knowledge of top fishing locations around North America. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back soon. Whoa, whoa.
Hey listeners, thanks for tuning in. We've got an outstanding show for you today, but before we get started, I wanted to share we have some exciting new episodes in the works, such as the Bow River in Alberta and the Salmon River in upstate New York, so check back again soon. And last week, we featured Gabe Revest, who shared stories from the Yukon backcountry in search of trophy bull trout, moose, and even how a grizzly bear used his favorite canoe as a chew toy. So give that a listen if you haven't already. Hey, and if you like the show, please give us a share, like, or follow on Instagram, and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And today, our destination is the legendary Henry's Fork in Eastern Idaho, and our guest is Idaho Fish and Game biologist and expert fly angler, Brett High. Eastern Idaho and the surrounding area is a fly angler's paradise and with some of the finest trout streams in the world. And the Henry's Fork, the crown jewel, seemingly has it all, with prolific hatches, incredible water diversity, and large and abundant trout. Could the Henry's Fork be the finest trout stream in the West? According to Trout Unlimited's Top 100 Stream Guide, the answer is yes. A native Idahoan, Brett grew up in Blackfoot, Idaho, and received his master's in fisheries resources from the University of Idaho. Since then, he spent his entire career on trout, now manages Region 6 for Idaho Fish and Game, and is an expert on the Henry's Fork. So let's listen while Brett fills us in on why every angler should make the pilgrimage to the Henry's Fork to test their mettle against these wary trout. Brett, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so glad. So today you had a busy day, you were telling me. You did some electroshocking on the Henry's Fork. How'd that go?
Yeah, it was great. We had a group of 13 college students that are working towards a fisheries degree. We had them out there in some rafts, many of them for the first time doing some raft electrofishing, and we had a blast. They were actually collecting suckers for some age and growth studies that they're going to be working on. Utah suckers are the primary species we have there. And so they got to handle some large suckers, but an occasional trout as well. They had a ball. It was fun.
Oh, good. Yeah. Did you turn up some big trout too?
Sure did. Yeah, it's fall, and brown trout are in spawning mode, and they're congregating in the shallows. And so we turned up some brown trout as well as some rainbows and whitefish and the suckers, of course. And the kids had their chance to try to net them, and there were a lot of fish netted, but a lot of fish missed too.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. So when you're working the Henry's Fork, is it pretty hard not to reach into the back of the truck and get the fly rod out?
Yeah. In fact, I was joking around with the kids at the boat ramp when we were having some of the group do the shuttle for us. I was saying, okay, who's got the rods? Let's start fishing while we're waiting.
Yeah. Lunch break. All right. So I saw that there's a new state record cutthroat trout caught this summer. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we actually have had two turned in this year from the local area, not in the Henry's Fork specifically, but the first one was a 30.5-inch cutthroat trout from the Snake River, down closer to my homeland, the Blackfoot country, south of Idaho Falls. And that one was a catch and release record. We opened that up about 5 years ago as a department, Idaho Fish and Game. So there's two different categories. There's the certified weight where you harvest the fish and you have it weighed on a certified scale and go that route, the traditional route. But we started this new opportunity for catch and release folks that we just call it the catch and release record. And so we have them take a picture of them holding the fish and then a picture of them with the fish on a tape measure. And they submit the paperwork and they can be put in for a state record and on the list as well that way. So that's what happened this year, a 30.5-inch one down closer to Blackfoot.
Nice.
Unfortunately, that's not in the region that I manage, but fortunately, we had a bigger fish turned in a month later in the Upper Snake region, which is where I work. So it's nice that the 31-inch new record came from the appropriate region where cutthroat are king.
Yeah. Yeah. The article said that the fish dragged the kid. It was a younger guy. I'm sure it was a kid, but dragged him for a half a mile downstream in a drift boat.
I don't doubt it. It was a very healthy 31-inch fish, too. I've actually had phone calls with people wondering how much it weighed, but, catch and release record, we don't weigh it, so I don't know.
Yeah, man, must have been, I don't know, 20 pounds or more? What do you think?
It was a big fish. I was thinking like 18, maybe 20. Yeah.
Yeah. Geez, it's like an ocean fish. So are the October caddis showing up yet?
Haven't seen any yet, but it's got to be soon.
Okay. And what have you got now out there?
Right now, blue-wing olives are providing some good dry fly action on the surface. And then, of course, the nymphs, fishing nymphs underneath.
Okay. So I hear you're a bird hunter. How's the hunting been?
Hunting's been fun. Yeah, we don't have a lot of upland birds in this part of the state, but what we do have is a neat native bird, our Columbian sharp-tailed grouse. This is kind of the stronghold for Idaho for sharp-tails. And it's a short season. It's just the month of October, so I love to get out as much as I can. And I got a pup that's a year and a half, and she's just starting to figure things out and has had some good retrieves and has had luck finding birds. And, yeah, we're having a good time.
You got her holding yet?
Well, not yet. She these sharp-tails, they've been a little flighty so far. I'm going to head out tomorrow. We'll see how it goes tomorrow. But so far, they've been getting up too wild for her to really get a solid point on.
Yeah. Hey, well, good luck on that. That's fun bringing up a young dog like that. That's just so fun to watch a dog work. This time of year, I'm always torn between the hunting and the fishing. I like them both.
Same here. Too many hobbies.
Right, exactly. Oh my gosh, I could retire tomorrow. Hey, so tell us about Eastern Idaho. So what makes this such a mecca for fly anglers?
Yeah, Eastern Idaho, it really is a mecca. It's part of that corner of the world where trout just grow phenomenally well. And we have a lot of water, a lot of rivers, a lot of streams. A lot of them are world famous. There's amazing diversity, and not only the species, but the topography and the geology and the type of habitats where you can chase these fish. We get phone calls quite often, people coming in to fish the area, and they say, well, where can I find fish? And pretty much the answer is any blue stuff on the map, you're going to find trout. And that's what makes this area so unique is so many miles of trout streams and some really amazing waters. It's a fly fisherman's paradise.
And the scenery is just beautiful out there. It
really is. Yeah. With the Teton Range, Yellowstone Park, and then of course, Montana and Western Wyoming, as well as what we have here in Eastern Idaho. It's a great place.
Yeah. How far is the Henry's Fork, like the upper part of the Henry's Fork from the park, from Yellowstone?
Wow.
Pretty close, isn't it?
Yeah. So the Henry's Fork starts with the outlet of Henry's Lake, meeting up with Big Springs. And that is about 15 miles from West Yellowstone, which is the gate to the park.
Oh, really close. Yeah, really close. I was looking on a map, and it looks like I counted 6 major trout streams, all within, I don't know, like 30, 40, maybe 50 miles. The Yellowstone, the Snake, the Madison, the Gallatin, the Jefferson, and of course the Henry's Fork. And then you got all the tributaries, leading into those. So that's a lot of trout streams in a very small area.
Yep.
So I was in Colorado earlier this summer and came across this really cool app called Trout Routes. If you've ever looked for a good map to help you with anything from public access to finding the best trout streams in a given area, I highly recommend checking out Trout Routes. Trout Routes has mapped out each and every trout stream by state, covering public land access, places to camp, hiking trails, stream flows, bridge access points, boat launches, fly shops, and even interactive elevation charts. And you can download maps for offline use. Today, they cover 7 states, including Colorado and the Driftless region in the Midwest. Hey, we did a show on the Driftless a couple of months ago. And good news, they're working on a big update to add 7 new states, including Montana, Wyoming, and Michigan. So if you have an upcoming trip or looking to explore nearby streams, I suggest you check out Trout Routes today on your Apple or Android phone. So what about in your region? How would you describe the fishing opportunities there?
Fishing opportunities in the Upper Snake region are pretty much focused on trout. We have mainly trout in our region. We have some amazing rivers along with the Henry's Fork of the Snake River. We have the Teton River. We have the South Fork of the Snake River. Across the desert, still within our region, we have the Big Lost River and as well as the Little Lost River, where we have some bull trout. So get some variety there. But yeah, those are the primary rivers that we have: the Big Lost, Little Lost, Henry's Fork, Teton, and South Fork of the Snake.
And how are they different? Or maybe they're similar. I don't know, but can you describe a little bit of these fisheries?
Yeah, you bet. They're similar in that they're all trout streams, but they do vary in their size and accessibility as far as an angler. So South Fork of the Snake is a pretty large system. In the summertime, when most anglers are fishing it, it'll be running 10 to 15,000 CFS.
Oh, that's big.
It is big. There are a lot of braided channels, which makes it great for exploring and fishing, but it's tough from a wade fisherman standpoint. If you're trying to come out here in the summertime and fish, there are places where you can get in and wade around, but it's just more accessible with a boat because of its size.
Okay.
But it is kind of like the Henry's Fork in that it has kind of three distinct segments, with the upper river, a canyon stretch in the middle, and then you get down in the lower upper valley stuff where it's broad plain that it comes out on and gets more sinuous and slows down in velocity a little bit. But
nice.
So that's the South Fork. If we move north, kind of the little brother to the South Fork and the Henry's Fork, the Teton River, kind of gets overlooked by people, but it's getting more and more attention these days. It's a fine fishery in its own right, but it's very similar to the segments that I just described for the South Fork, with an upper river. It's through a valley. It's very, very spring-like, small stream up there. It's very wader friendly, a lot of access, but it's fun to float to and fish out of a boat. The canyon section of the Teton is incredible trout fishing, but it's also incredibly difficult to access. There's only a couple of ways in there, and there's a lot of whitewater. There's one section with Class 5 rapids, and then a lot of Class 3 rapids. And depending on the flows, it can get up to Class 4. So the difficulty of getting there, and then the whitewater kind of keeps people out. And then the lower Teton, it comes out onto the upper Snake Plain and goes through the ag land too, just like the lower South Fork. And it's unique in that it's a natural split system on the lower end. Usually forks to rivers are upstream and they come together as the river moves downstream. But in the Teton's case, it splits in the lower part. And there's a North Fork of the Teton and a South Fork of the Teton. Both of them hold fish, lots of private property around them, so access is a little tricky, but there's some good fishing to be had in those systems too.
That's cool. And what about some of the reservoirs in the area? Obviously, there's Henry's Lake. Are there some other reservoirs?
Yeah, probably the one that gets the most fishing pressure in our region would be Ryrie Reservoir. It's about 12 miles long, and it's just close to Idaho Falls. Is the reason why it gets so much pressure. It's 10 miles east of Idaho Falls. And it is one of the locations where we have something other than trout. We do have trout in Ryrie Reservoir. We stock a lot of rainbow trout, but there are some wild cutthroat still there. And then we also stock kokanee salmon. So it's a valued kokanee fishery. And then when the reservoir was completed in the 70s, the department stocked smallmouth bass in there as well as yellow perch. And those are also doing very well. The perch and the bass. The bass don't grow very big because it's pretty cold country. We don't have a long growing season for bass.
Yeah.
But they're there, and anglers like the diversity to go fish for them.
That's great.
We got Palisades Reservoir, so that's on the South Fork of the Snake. It's a large system. Again, it is stocked with some fish, and people do fish it, but catch rates are lower than our other reservoirs. But it's got Yellowstone cutthroat trout, brown trout, and a few kokanee salmon in there too.
Cool.
And then moving up the drainage to the Henry's Fork, there's a small reservoir called Ashton Reservoir that actually is one of the best fisheries if you're looking for just opportunities to catch hatchery fish. We stock it with about 20,000 fish every year, and it's got some pretty good catch rates. I think we're around 3 fish per hour on average, and that's 3 times as high as what we typically see in other places. But again, they're hatchery trout, and it's a fun place for kids to go and fish. Very kid friendly.
Bend a rod. That's great.
Yeah. And then there's Island Park Reservoir, lots of cabins on Island Park Reservoir. It's in that upper Henry's Fork drainage. So a lot of summer homes, but it's a popular place for people to fish and ice fish as well in the wintertime. But from an angler standpoint, the big draw for our still waters is a little bit further up the drainage in the Henry's Fork by the Montana border, and that's Henry's Lake. That's a world-renowned fishery because we get trout with the potential growing, 15, 16 pounds. Every year we have fish that big caught.
That's great, really.
Yeah, it's a great productive fishery. The fish grow fast, they grow big, and people come from all over to fish that place.
Yeah, that's amazing. And are people getting those big ones on fly rods, or how are they going after those?
They are.
Okay.
Yeah, most people fish Henry's Lake with fly gear, and kind of depends on what time of year, on what technique you use. A lot of people throw streamer patterns, woolly buggers and whatnot, especially in the fall. This time of year is one of the best time of years to fish Henry's Lake.
Yeah.
Pulling streamer patterns can be very effective because they're on the hunt trying to put on some weight right before winter. And the fact that we just stocked a bunch of fingerlings in the lake in the end of September probably helps them key in on small fish as well. But
gonna say
those
food.
streamer patterns are good.
Yeah. So what are they, brown trout or Yellowstone, or what do you got in there?
So the big ones are a hybrid. Henry's Lake is a stronghold for our native Yellowstone cutthroat trout, and that's what we primarily stock in there.
Okay.
We take fish from the lake itself each winter. They start spawning in February, and we usually take about 2 million eggs. But in the first batch or two, we still produce hybrids. So we take cutthroat eggs and we mix them with rainbow trout milt from our Hayspur hatchery over off of Silver Creek. So we create those hybrids because that's what the anglers want. They want those big fish that grow with the hybrid vigor that get so large. But we sterilize them after fertilizing the eggs. We pressure treat the eggs to induce triploidy, which makes them sterile so that they're not going to pollute our genetics for our native cutthroat in the lake.
Oh, I see. You can control that then. And the hybrids get bigger. Okay. I didn't know that.
Yep, they do get bigger.
Do they fight harder than do they fight a little hard? I've noticed like a cut bow, I feel like fights a little harder than just a regular rainbow, for instance. But what do you think?
I would say they do. It might be just the size, though.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say they do fight pretty good. They definitely fight more than the cutthroat.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, that's great. And can you fish from shore?
You can. Henry's Lake is another spot it's kind of a common theme for Henry's Lake and the Henry's Fork itself. Is it's great wade fishing access. And this time of year, the fish come into the shoreline. So you really don't need a boat to fish in October on Henry's Lake. You can just roll up to the state park or over county at Frome Park or our hatchery. We have a fishing game property there that people can fish from. And those are congregating areas for fish this time of year. I suspect they're coming in because that's where we stock them. And they're probably keying in on those fish that we just stocked. But for whatever reason, they do congregate on the shorelines, and it can be pretty easy access for the wade fishermen.
That's great. So I read your report that you published last year on Henry's Lake that anglers caught about 1 fish per hour, but that was up from 1 fish per every 5 hours in 2016. And I was wondering, what's the reason for the big swing?
Yeah, that is something that we do see at Henry's Lake. We do see catch rates swing, and anglers get real happy when the catch rates are high, and they get fairly upset when they're not catching them, and a lot of finger pointing when they're not catching them. But the truth of the matter is it comes down to a lot of environmental variables that are outside of our control. So we can somewhat control catch rates by changing how many fish we stock. If there's more fish in the lake, then typically you see higher catch rates.
Right.
So that's one reason why we had such high catch rates last year, and again this year too, is the abundance of trout in Henry's Lake right now is pretty high. In fact, it's making me a little bit nervous as a fish manager. I actually requested fewer fish for being stocked into the lake next year, because if you get too many fish, then the size goes down. And, Henry's Lake is famous for big fish, so we want to protect that aspect of it.
Sure.
But the other thing at play is temperature. And Henry's Lake, it's a blessing and a curse. It's shallow. And because it's shallow, that's why those fish grow so big, is because it gets so much primary production going on. A lot of photosynthesis. Yep. A lot of food being produced for those fish. So they grow fast. But the curse is, you get a drought year or water levels are lower, a hot, dry summer, and temperatures can get in the way of fishing. You know, that water temperature, if it gets closer to that 70-degree mark, it's hard to get those fish to bite no matter how many of them are in the lake. And that can be coupled with blue-green algae blooms. We've seen those in warm years like 2016. There was a blue-green algae bloom, and that also negatively affects the fishermen too. So those are the primary things that affect catch rates: is how many fish are in there, but then water temperature and algae blooms.
So when it gets really warm, can the fish just run for some deeper water and be good down there?
You know, we actually have a graduate student from the University of Idaho working on that question this summer. She's been radio tagging fish the last 2 years, actually, and following them where they go throughout the summer and seeing if they target some thermal refugia, a place just to hide out when the water gets warm. And she's found a few spots. Targhee Creek is a very common spot, and you know, if you go there in July, that's where you're going to see the boats, as most anglers congregate around those tributary mouths. And it makes sense to see the fish behavior matching up with the angler behavior. They're congregating in the same places. So they do seek out that cooler water when the water gets warm.
Is the lake spring-fed?
There are springs, but there are a couple large tributaries as well, like Targhee Creek.
It's more like tributaries.
Duck Creek, yeah. Howard Creek is a spring-fed stream, so yeah, I would consider that a spring-fed system too.
I gotcha. So I was online reading up on the Henry's Fork, and so here's some words I found that describe the fishery: legendary, hollowed, famous, prolific, diverse, and paradise. So what's your take on this? So why do you think the Henry's Fork is a trout angler's paradise, or do you agree with that?
I would agree with all those descriptors. I love the Henry's Fork. Yeah, the Henry's Fork is an amazing place. And I think part of what makes it so special is the diversity of access and diversity of habitats where you can find these fish, on top of the diversity of the fish species you can find there. And then along with the history of the place and the access, the friendly access and wading opportunities that river offers. And then on top of that, you have the crazy growth rates of these fish. It's unbelievable. And no matter what size of fish you catch, you look at the fatness, or we call it the fitness level as biologists. You look at how fat these fish are, and it doesn't matter if they're 4 inches long or if they're 24 inches long. They're fat.
Are they like shaped like footballs, like that kind of a look?
Yeah.
Okay, I know what you mean.
If they were humans, they would be unhealthy. You know what I mean? They'd be like the Americans in the social scheme of things.
Yeah, right.
A little bit overweight, but they're very, very fast growing fish. So you combine all those attributes with the access, the diversity in the species, the incredible backdrops and the places where these fish are, and the size of these fish. It's a pretty incredible place to go fishing.
Yeah, and some pretty amazing hatches too, right?
Yeah, and I think that speaks to why they're so fat. Is very prolific hatches, very diverse hatches. They're just all summer long, there's something coming off. And I think that as a fly angler, you can get excited about those type of events.
Yeah. So what kind of fish do you have in there? You got, browns, rainbows. What else?
Yeah. And then there's brook trout and a few cutthroat, depending on where you're at.
Okay. And historically, was this a cutthroat fishery, or what'd you have there historically?
Well, it depends on your frame of reference for historical. So pre-settlement, it was the Yellowstone cutthroat trout stream. So in Idaho, everything upstream from Shoshone Falls, which is down by Twin Falls in southern Idaho, everything upstream from that point in the snake drainage was Yellowstone cutthroat trout. So downstream of Shoshone Falls, you had steelhead and chinook, and you had rainbows. But upstream of Shoshone Falls, obviously a huge fish barrier. We only had cutthroat.
Okay.
But long time ago, my Department of Idaho Fish and Game, we were part of it, worked to convert the Henry's Fork from a cutthroat stream over to a rainbow stream. And really, that's what that fishery has been made famous for, are the rainbow trout.
So that's intentional.
It was intentional at the time, you bet.
How many years ago?
Oh, that was early 50s.
Oh, a long time ago. Okay.
Yeah.
I get you. And you mentioned, history is one of the reasons the Henry's Fork is such a angler's paradise. I mean, I think it's named after Major Andrew Henry, an early fur trader, fur trapper.
Yep.
And if anyone saw the movie The Revenant, he's a prominent character in that movie. It's a pretty cool movie. But anything else on the history of this river you wanted to tell us about?
Oh, yeah. Well, the Henry's Fork, it was a major pathway for the fur trappers back in the day. So that would have been, let's see, 1820s and 30s.
Sure. Yeah.
There's a great book that is actually written by the trapper himself. It's Journal of a Trapper is the title of the book, Russell Osborne. And there's actually a bridge in Harriman Park, one of the famous sections of the Henry's Fork is Osborne Bridge, and it's named after him. But he traveled through that route through the Henry's Fork when he was here trapping in the 1830s. And
that's cool.
It's cool to read that book and hear his description of the valleys, the sizes, and what kind of animals he was seeing and where he was catching beaver, and just a neat book from a historical perspective. But then seeing the country still pretty much like it was when he was here, maybe different fish species, but still looks pretty same with most of it being public property, Forest Service or BLM or National Park. That's pretty cool.
That is, yeah.
Since they, kind of established the travel routes, it just makes sense that as people moved in and settled the area, it became a pathway for others as well. So early travelers to Yellowstone, they traveled up the Henry's Fork, and they did it via railroad. There's a railway that goes up from Warm River down low by Ashton, and it winds up through Island Park country, through the Henry's Fork stuff, and then up over the hill to what now is West Yellowstone and eventually into the park. That railroad isn't in place anymore, but that used to be the pathway for tourists to get to Yellowstone.
That's really neat. I love all those old trapper fur trader journals. There's a bunch of really good ones out there. Like Jim Bridger's is really good.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the Lewis and Clark journals are pretty amazing. Houghton Mifflin's got a really good version of that. They cut out all the kind of the science stuff and they just leave in all the action, the encounters with Indians and grizzly bears and things like that. That's really fun.
Yeah.
All right. I got to ask you, so you've been fishing the Henry's Fork for how many years?
Let's see. I probably was about 7 when I started fishing it, when my mom was deathly afraid of water. So she didn't like me playing around water that size when I was young.
Probably smart mom.
It's probably about 40 years now I've been fishing
40 years. Okay. So what's your personal best?
That I've actually landed?
Yeah, right. Only the ones you land. That's all we're counting today.
Yeah. My personal best off of the Henry's Fork, boy. I guess I'm stuck at that 21-inch mark right now. Yeah.
Dude, I take that all day long. That's a heck of a trout.
I've seen bigger.
Is it a rainbow or brown?
Yeah, it was a brown trout.
Oh, is it brown? Okay.
Yep. But I saw a 25-inch brown trout earlier this week on the Henry's Fork. We concluded our fish survey in the lower Henry's Fork, clean down by St. Anthony.
Yeah.
And we had a 25-inch brown trout in that survey.
So you're electroshocking?
Yes.
And he came belly up there, huh?
Yeah. And again, he wasn't a skinny 25-inch fish either.
Now, you were telling me about a kid you saw from your truck or something standing on a bridge who had a big fish. You want to tell us that story?
You bet. Yeah, I must have been, 8 or 9 years old. My parents took us up to a campground just on the edge of the forest where Warm River comes into the Henry's Fork. There's a Forest Service campground on Warm River. And we were camped there, but they decided to take us up the road to go see Mesa Falls, which is a very scenic waterfall on the Henry's Fork. It's, 110 feet or something tall. It's pretty amazing with a nice overlook you can go stand on and check out. But the road that goes up to it goes up a steep hill that you can actually look down off the road down to the campground. And to go to the campground, there was a bridge over the river. And there are these 2 kids down there on the bridge. They were carrying fishing poles, obviously fishing. But there was a young boy and an older girl. I imagine they were brother and sister. But the boy had this huge fish, and he was just hanging. It was at least half as tall as he was. And my uncle was in the truck with us, and he yells out the window. He says, "Hey, kid, put that fish back." And the kid was small. He threw that fish over the bridge into the river, and his older sister just started smacking him on the head.
Oh, that's hilarious. Don't you know?
Oh, Uncle Rod, I can't believe you did that.
So you had that set it for you, right? You had a life of being a biologist. Like, we got to take care of these people or keeping these fish, right?
That's right. Yep.
Oh my gosh.
That's not the way you practice catch and release.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That one might end up being food for a grizzly bear or something.
Yeah, we went around the corner. Hopefully they were able to get that fish before it drifted too far downstream, but I don't know.
Exactly. What's your most memorable trout ever on the river?
My most memorable trout, it was actually a fish that we did not land, if that's all right, if I share that story.
Sure.
My family, so I take my kids now, not my parents, but my kids and I, we have a tradition in our family. We hit the salmon fly hatch every year. And there's a section of river that we hit, and it's a little bit more remote than other sections, so it's fun. And there's some white water in there, so we take a raft in and do the fish and float and have a nice shore lunch. And the most memorable fish, we were heading down the river, and we hit this slack water section. So we've been bouncing through some riffles and rapids, and we hit this slack water section, and a pretty steep canyon wall come down with a few trees hanging out in the water. And we're just lazily drifting through this pool section, just kind of relaxing. And I was rowing, my wife was fishing, and she just had her foam salmon fly pattern out there drifting alongside, and we're taking in the scenery. And all of a sudden there was this huge splash. And I knew, of course, that it was my wife's fly that had just been hammered. And I look up, and she's still looking at the scenery. Not even paying attention to the fly. And I'm like, honey, you gonna set the hook on that?
Yeah.
So
that's
a standing joke from now on. Every year we float on during the salmon fly hatch, we tease mom, hey mom, you gonna set the hook today?
We'll have to get her on the horn here and have her tell her side of the story, right?
Oh yeah, she don't like that story. We might need to keep that to ourselves.
So she missed it. Did she sting it? Did she have it on for a minute or?
Yeah, for a little bit, but didn't land it. Other than that, I'd say my next favorite, next memorable fish would be actually my daughter's. So on that same float, different year, my daughter would have been, she'd probably been about 14 at the time. Just starting to figure out fly fishing to the point where she could do it by herself. And we had stopped at a place to fish some salmon flies and eat some lunch. And so she was wade fishing and all on her own. And she hooks this fish, and she goes on to fight this fish. These are spring flows, and there's a big fish, so she had to play it pretty well to land this on 4X tippet. And across the river, there was a guide boat, and they watched this whole thing play out, the guide and the two clients.
Yeah.
And she lands it, and I'm giving her high fives and congratulating her. It ended up being an 18-inch brown trout.
Oh, nice.
And I've got a picture of it. It's on my computer. But she lands it. She's all smiles and laughing. And the guides and the clients across the river just start cheering and applauding her. And like, yeah, that was cool.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, she had some fans there on the river.
Yeah.
That's great. But they turned to their guide and said, hey, man, how come we're not catching those? That guy over there, his daughter just did. Yeah, I'm sure. Well, that's great. So tell me, how did you end up being a biologist in Region 6 in Idaho? I mean, that's got to be a pretty revered region to be doing this kind of work. How'd you end up there?
Oh, boy, it was a long road, to be honest with you. I always wanted to be a biologist. And so I chased education and summer temporary jobs for many years. And I got to be honest with you, the only reason I'm in this chair right now is because of my wife being very supportive. In those years of chasing jobs and education, we moved 14 times and 3 different states. And in grad school, we had 4 kids, and it was a grind, but just kept pushing and not giving up. And eventually some opportunities came around. I started my professional career after graduate school with the Forest Service. Spent a couple of years in Oregon working for the Forest Service. And then I had an opportunity to come back to Idaho. Took a pretty significant pay cut to do that. But I wanted to work in Idaho, and I wanted to work for the department that managed the fisheries. So I got on as a research biologist for the first few years of the Idaho Fish and Game. And my position there was studying wild trout. And so the wild trout biologist for our department, they work on research projects that help managers like me answer questions that they may have as they're managing their fisheries. So they target things like hooking mortality or impacts of stocking hatchery fish and wild trout streams, those type of questions that affect not just one river, but potentially several different systems across the state.
Okay.
I got to do that research for a few years and then had the opportunity to come back to Eastern Idaho, and I jumped at that chance. And so I came over as a regional biologist and spent 11 years working as a regional biologist. And my focus was the South Fork of the Snake and the Teton rivers. Those are the rivers that I had charge over as a biologist. And then had the opportunity to promote to the manager, and now I get to work across the whole region.
No kidding. Good for you. Congratulations. That's a great story. Sounds like you worked hard and had a supportive wife.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I'm very blessed and consider myself lucky to be working on the rivers that I grew up fishing.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe they need to raise some taxes out there to get your, so you don't have to take that pay cut, right?
Well, the money isn't everything, right?
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, what a lifestyle. That says a lot. So you were telling me that you've got a long family history of your family being from Idaho, right? How far back do you guys go?
Yeah, I'm fourth generation Idahoan. So
wow.
Yeah, some of the original highs in Idaho, they came over to homestead, and they actually homesteaded in the Henry's Fork country up out of Ashton.
Oh, man. So you're back home.
That would have been my great-great-grandfather.
No kidding.
Yep.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Can you go to, see some gravestones or anything?
Yep. The cemeteries up out of Ashton and Ora, and then down the newer ones are down in Manan, further south, but still along the Henry's Fork. And we used to do that every Memorial weekend growing up. Parents would take us for a drive. We'd go around and visit the grave sites and drive up to Ashton, put a few flowers on the graves, and then they would stop and let me fish just to keep me happy.
Oh,
I remember one trip up there on a Memorial weekend to check out the graves, stopped at Ora Bridge, which is just west of Ashton, and a very, very common spot to fish. In fact, right now it's fishing really well. But Ora Bridge, I was young, maybe a 12 or 13, young teenager, just trying to figure out the whole fly fishing thing. And the Mother's Day caddis hatch was going on. And there was a fly fisherman standing by the bridge, and he was catching fish almost every cast. And I was struggling, just trying to get a hit. And then that's one of the times I realized I got a lot to learn about this fly fishing stuff.
Oh, it's interesting. So I got to ask you, what was life like growing up in a state like Idaho with all this amazing fishing and hunting opportunities right at your back door?
Well, I thought that was just the way it was everywhere. I thought that was normal.
Oh, man.
But it was pretty incredible. My parents and my grandparents loved to hunt and fish. My grandma she loved fishing. And so Grandpa and Grandma would take me fishing. My dad loved hunting. So I kind of got the best of both worlds.
That's cool. So fast forward, what kind of work are you doing now as a biologist for the state?
So as a biologist for the state, now I'm really just working to make fishing better. And that's what us regional folks do. We try to identify if there's any issues going on in a system that may be causing the populations to be on the decline. And then so we'll do a lot of monitoring just to keep tabs on what our populations are doing, keep our thumb on the pulse. And then when we see a hiccup, when we see things going different than what we'd like to see, then we get to target in some research. And so we'll design a research project around the questions that the monitoring reveals. And then it's the fun part. Once you get the answers from research and you have the monitoring data to support it, then we can start trying to address the problem, again, with the goal of trying to make fishing better. So that could be anything from changing regulations, limiting harvest, to encouraging harvest like we do in some places, and actually asking people to harvest more fish to either promote fish size or conserve a native fish species, or doing habitat restoration. It just depends on what's going on. But I hope that answers adequately what I'm trying to do.
It sounds like there's lots of levers you can pull, once you figure out what the problem is.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like there's not, but sometimes there are.
Yeah. What's the research saying right now about the Henry's Fork? How's the system doing?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, we just finished our survey on the St. Anthony stretch, and that reach we sample every 3 to 5 years. We have a couple other reaches that we sample every year, and Box Canyon is the primary one. And the last 2 years, we've set records for how many fish per mile are in Box Canyon. So overall, that's kind of the trend we're seeing in the Henry's Fork. Some great things happening right now with our fish numbers and the health of the river. And I would be, I got to give credit where credit's due. It's not just fishing game that's working towards this goal of having fishing be great in this amazing world-renowned river. There's a number of organizations and individuals, agencies that are working towards that same goal. And so we got Forest Service folks involved. We got a coalition of irrigators and interested stakeholders in the Henry's Fork Watershed Council that are very instrumental in helping us all make good, smart decisions. And also some nonprofit organizations, Henry's Fork Foundation, they do a lot of great work in the drainage.
Oh, do they? Oh, good. I've heard of them.
Yeah, the fish are doing great, and I see a bright future for the next several years going on in Henry's Fork.
Nice job. Looks like it's under great management.
Yeah, it's not too bad right now. When things are going well, it's good to be a manager.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So what is the fish count up in Box Canyon per mile?
We're just over 5,000 trout per mile.
5,000. And how do you guys actually do that? I mean, is it because like how small of a trout do you include in that count?
Yeah, that's a great question because we use electrofishing to do our surveys. And there is a size selectivity question. There's not all fish can be caught using electricity. The bigger the fish are, the more susceptible they are to the electricity because of their surface area.
Okay.
So we include just age 1 and older fish in that estimate. So that 5,000 are just age 1 and older. So that's about an 8-inch fish and older or larger.
So you're just looking at the size of them. If it's 8 inches, count it. If it's not, don't count it.
Right.
Pretty much. Oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting. Well, tell us about the Henry's Fork. Like, how do you break it down? What are the major sections of the river? How does the character of the water change as it makes its way down to the Snake River?
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll start at the top. So a lot of the water comes out of Henry's Lake, and it's actually called the Henry's Lake Outlet, that channel. And that runs for several miles through a big, flat, open area. It's part of the Island Park caldera, which when the Yellowstone hotspot moved through, it kind of blew the top off of that area. So we got a crater around it and then a generally flat center. So we have this spring-like winding channel through willows between Henry's Lake and the confluence with Big Springs. They actually call that the Flat Ranch, that section there.
Okay.
There's a huge Nature Conservancy property there, which is another great access for the wade angler. You can park there at the office for the Nature Conservancy and then hike out across on their property and fish the outlet.
Oh, good info.
That's the best place. If you want to target native cutthroat, that's where you're going to run into the most of them is at Henry's Lake Outlet.
Nice.
And then moving downstream, I already mentioned Big Springs. That's what a lot of folks consider the headwaters of the Henry's Fork. It's a very large spring popping up out of the ground, and it's 52 degrees or something like that all year long. Very productive. There's actually a spot there right by the spring that's closed for fishing. It's a fish viewing and fish feeding site. So if you're in the area and you'd like to see just how productive and how these fish grow, stop by there at that bridge at Big Springs and check them out. The fish are pretty impressive, standing over a 10-pound rainbow, coming up to eat chunks of bread. So that's the Big Springs is closed for fishing until you get down to the confluence with the outlet. And then from there, it's open to fishing, and it's open year-round. And that is what we call the max-in stretch of the Henry's Fork. And that is the section of the river upstream from Island Park Reservoir. And that, again, is very much a spring creek. It's very flat, very slow, very constant water temperature. There's a lot of fish in there. We actually supplement it as well. There's a fair amount of fishing pressure. There's a couple of hotels right there where Highway 20 crosses maxed in, so it gets a lot of tourists fishing pressure. People heading up to Yellowstone, they'll stop there and fish. And then just the recreationists from wherever heading to Island Park to hang out.
Right.
So then the Henry's Fork goes into Island Park Reservoir. Downstream of Island Park Reservoir is the Box Canyon stretch of the Henry's Fork. It's all rainbow trout. I guess there's an occasional brook trout that comes out of Buffalo River, which is another Spring Creek tributary that comes into Henry's Fork downstream, just immediately downstream of Island Park Dam.
Yeah.
Great place to fish in the winter, by the way, if you're looking for some constant water temperature. Buffalo River is a good spot. But Box Canyon is another great spot. It's a very popular spot for fly anglers because, again, it's open year-round to fishing, and it's actually upstream of Harriman Ranch. And really a lot of the fish that hang out in Harriman in the summer most likely head up into that Box Canyon stretch in the winter.
Okay.
So that's a good place to chase some of those big fish. And I guess that gives away the next section moving downstream. Downstream of Box Canyon is Harriman. Cool history with that park. It was owned privately by a family that was in the railroad business, and they wanted to donate it to the state of Idaho, make it a publicly accessible state park. But at the time, Idaho didn't have a state parks. There was no state parks department. And this was such a huge donation that they had some leverage, the family did, and they basically required the state of Idaho to create a parks department on condition of this donation.
That's great.
Yeah, it's a great legacy to the family, and it's been a great boon to fly anglers because that's really the place where a lot of attention is given from people outside the state or even the country. They hear about Harriman Park and the PhD of rainbows that go on there. It's a different kind of fishing. It's very unique, usually targeting individual fish and spending hours slowly working in on a rising fish, waiting for the hatch to peak and figuring out the rhythm that fish is coming up and feeding, finding the right pattern and casting that right pattern in time to that feeder. That's kind of the mode of fishing on the Harriman Ranch. And that's, I guess where the term trout hunter comes from, because you're very much stalking individual fish in that clear Spring Creek type water.
Okay. Sounds super technical, maybe not for a beginner, but for somebody with a little more experience.
Agreed. Yeah, definitely not a place to take a beginner.
Okay. But sounds amazing. I mean, what I read about it, it sounds absolutely incredible.
Yeah. Yep. It is. It's fly fishing only. That was another requirement by the family that donated the property. They actually had some requirements on when that section of river could be fished and what tackle could be used. So it has an odd start date. It opens in June and it's fly fishing only.
Okay.
And again, it's very much a Spring Creek, very, very smooth, flat water and lots of macrophytes and lots of bugs coming off and very picky fish.
Yeah. Lots of time to look at a bug too, it sounds like, as it's floating slowly by them. What tippets do you have to use down there?
Down there, 5 or 6X isn't too uncommon.
Okay. Yeah, I would figure at least that. Interesting. Okay. Harriman, what's past Harriman then?
Downstream of Harriman is the Pine Haven stretch of the Henry's Fork. And it starts in Harriman Park and continues down to a cabin community called Pine Haven. And it starts the transition between the Spring Creek flat water back to a more riffle run pool type of channel. It's still rainbow from Island Park down to Mesa Falls. It's all rainbow trout. So yeah, the Pine Haven stretch, and that's also a good spot to fish in the fall. Right now, it's fishing really well in that stretch of water, as well as the next section downstream, which is Riverside. And Riverside is the stretch of the Henry's Fork from the boundary of Harriman Park downstream to the falls. Lower and Upper Mesa Falls are the big ones, but there's a couple other smaller falls in there. Sheep Falls is one. And then there's a spot called Hatchery Ford with pretty good rapids through there too. So if you're going to do a float, definitely check a map and make sure you're taken out before you get down to those waterfalls.
A little surprise there for you if you don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then down below the falls, you get into the canyon. And there is actually a spot where you can drag a raft down into the canyon. And downstream from Mesa Falls, you'll start seeing brown trout show up into the river. And that section is where Warm River comes out of the canyon, and Warm River joins the Henry's Fork. And then that canyon continues down through the Stone Bridge Reach to where Henry's Fork crosses Highway 20. And that's where Ashton Reservoir is, right? The top end of Ashton Reservoir is kind of Ashton 20, just north of Ashton, at Highway 20, I should say.
Okay.
And then downstream of Ashton Reservoir, it just keeps going. There's so much water, so much good stuff. But you got Ora, you got Vernon, you got Chester and St. Anthony. And then you get down even further down into Beaver Dick and the Rexburg country. Fishing does start to get slower down there in that country because we had a catastrophic failure of a very large reservoir on Teton River. The Teton Dam blew in 1975. And so tons of sediment and channel alteration occurred. And so that very lower end of Henry's Fork is probably not your best place to fish, but there's still miles.
So we're talking, over 100 miles of river here?
Yeah, I looked it up. There's 125 miles, according to USGS, from Henry's Lake down to the confluence with the South Fork of the Snake near Manan.
And how's the public access? All these different sections you mentioned, can public get in and fish all those?
Nearly everyone. Yeah, all the section I mentioned have accessible places for both boat fishermen and wade anglers.
Okay. So I know it's a super popular place to go. Can you avoid the crowds? Are there crowds when you're out there?
Oh, yeah. Ora, Vernon, Stonebridge, those places, if you come out during the salmon fly hatch from the end of May to early June, can be quite the sight to see with how many, we call it the boat hatch, you get so many people, there's no room to park. And yeah, they're very popular stretches to fish during the salmon fly hatch. But that being said, there's so much water that you can, if you're willing to put in a little bit of effort, you can get away from crowds too, even during the salmon fly hatch. For example, that stretch around the falls where boats can't float, you can hike in there. There's places where there aren't even roads. You can just find a way to get down in there, and you'll have a couple miles or more just you.
What are your stream access laws out there?
So in Idaho, a navigable stream such as the Henry's Fork is publicly accessible under the high water mark. So you can get in the channel and you can wade upstream and downstream as far as you want to go.
Okay, so you can be standing on the ground, standing in the water, grabbing branches and trees and things, and you're not trespassing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And if you come up along a fence or a road, the law does allow you to get out of the channel to cross that fence or road as long as you get back in the channel as soon as you can and you're not wandering around on people's private property.
I see. Give me just an overview of, like the hatch chart for this system. What's that look like?
Very busy.
Big, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of species, and they overlap each other, and there's actually a really good chart on the Henry's Fork Angler website. They're one of the outfitting shops here in the Upper Henry's Fork.
Okay.
But to just walk through it real quick, it starts early in the spring, even late winter. You get some nice mixed days where it's slightly overcast or even mostly overcast, and you can get some dry fly action with midges. So that would be the first one, would be the midge. And then it kicks off with the Mother's Day caddis. After that, right after the Mother's Day caddis, which is going to be, early, mid-May, and then end of May, the salmon flies are the next major hatch to start. And they work their way through the system through the next month or so. And right behind them are the golden stones. Golden stones start hatching. And shortly after the golden stones, you start seeing some PMDs. We see those most of the summer on the riffles. And then during PMDs, there's a really good green drake hatch on the Henry's Fork. And then PMDs are going to take it through summer. And then we start picking up with October caddis and blue wing olives in the fall.
Okay. Yeah. Busy. Sounds like a lot of fun for a dry fly fisherman.
Yes.
So I read a quote from Mike Lawson, who's general manager at Henry's Fork Angler, pretty well-known author, and he said that the ranch rainbows have destroyed the egos of some of the world's finest anglers on more than one occasion.
And he would be the guy to be able to make that claim. He is kind of a Harriman Ranch expert, but
Is he? Okay. All right. So tell me, in your experience, what are the most successful anglers doing that sets them apart from the rest of the anglers?
The most successful anglers are following the hatches.
Yeah.
So they're keying in on the bugs that the fish are keying in on. They're fishing the right patterns and the right sizes and the right times of day to stay with the hatches.
Yeah.
And not just the time of day, but also the section of river.
Right. So very dialed in to what's happening. What about technique? What about sight fish? I don't know. What kinds of things technique-wise are these top anglers doing, do you think, that might set them apart?
I think one technique that would certainly ring true with most of these successful anglers are, being very, very observant, following the hatches, but also casting to rising fish. So since it's a easily accessible wade fishing system, you can take your time and spend a little bit of time observing and watching and say, okay, this seam here with this eddy, we got fish rising right there, casting to the risers with the right pattern. And then after that, switching it up and plying the water underneath with some nymphs. And so you're covering all the bases and just being a lot more successful by having those different options.
Okay. What kind of rod would you recommend? Like a 9-foot 5 weight? Is that typical out there? Or?
Yeah, unless you're really going more specific, like this time of year, people will really throw a lot of streamers. So a good solid 6 weight, throw the streamers for brown trout.
Sure. Well, let me ask you this. You talked about your daughter and your family and whatnot. I'm curious, living this life that you've been living, what is fishing given you and your family?
What does it mean to me and my family?
What has it given you and your family?
Oh, it's given us a ton of great memories, and it's given us the opportunity to create some lasting bonds as a family.
Yeah. So it's about more than catching fish, huh?
For me, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's great.
Don't get me wrong. I love to catch fish, especially when I'm fishing by myself, but there's just something different when you watch your kids catch fish.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with you. So give me a rundown on some of the lodges and the fly shops and the outfitters in the area. What are some of the places that people could be calling?
Yeah, we have a lot of great resources and to tap into, and these guys know their stuff. So we already mentioned one shop, Henry's Fork Anglers and Mike Lawson.
Yeah.
Another shop that are kind of focused directly on the Henry's Fork are Trout Hunter. And they have a great facility, both Trout Hunter and Henry's Fork Anglers. They have lodges in Last Chance in Island Park, and great fly shops, great people that work there, and some excellent guides too. So those are a couple great outfitters, but you also have Three Rivers Ranch based out of Ashton. You have WorldCast. They're actually based out of Victor, but they work in the Henry's Fork drainage as well. Let's see, who else am I?
Teton Valley Lodge. I think you mentioned
Teton Valley.
I
forgot. Yeah, Teton Valley Lodge. Brian Berry runs an excellent shop up there, and they work in the Teton and the Henry's Fork as well as the South Fork. So they do come over in Henry's Fork as well.
Henry's Fork Lodge.
I think those are the main ones: Henry's Fork Anglers, and Trout Hunter, WorldCast, Teton Valley Lodge.
Okay. So if you're out there and you're stumped and having some trouble, there's plenty of places to run to get some local knowledge, huh?
You bet. And for additional local knowledge, if you're coming out on maybe doing a self-guided trip and you just want to stop in and visit with these guys, Trout Hunter and Henry's Fork Anglers up in Last Chance are a great resource, and they have great fly shops. But also here in Idaho Falls, Jimmy's all-season angler. The guy he grew up here too. He's fished these places for years. Jimmy knows his stuff. He's a great resource for not only advice, but flies as well, and all kinds of gear. And same with the Idaho Outfitters just off of Highway 20. They're not offering guide services yet, but they do have a great shop and great fly selection and some good advice. So lots of places to stop in and get stuff.
I wonder if we could get some pictures of your favorite flies for the Henry's Fork and put those out on the Destination Angler Facebook page. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah, I could do that.
Oh, that'd be great. Okay. We'd love to see some of those, some of your top patterns as you kind of move through the seasons.
I tie most of my own flies, so some of them are kind of ugly.
No, come on, man. Those are the best, right? You've got the,
Yeah.
a little slightly darker, slightly bigger, slightly something, just
They
for
work
what
for
you
me,
like.
so I'm like, yeah, that'll work.
No, that's great. See, maybe we get a new pattern going here that the world will find out about, right? The Brett special.
Maybe. I guess I'd have to name it.
Right. Does the state have some resources, some websites that anglers should be looking at?
Yeah, Henry's Fork Foundation has a great website for folks that are looking for current conditions on the river. Not just river flows, but they have a number of water quality monitoring stations that have real-time data. So you can look at water flows, but also water temperatures, turbidity, dissolved oxygen, all kinds of crazy stuff. That's a great resource to have. And again, it's real time on their website.
Okay.
But then for flies and stuff, definitely check out the hatch chart on Henry's Fork Anglers. And Jimmy's has a fishing report page. You can check out his fishing reports on Jimmy's All Season Anglers website.
Okay. Those sound great. Well, listen, we'll post this information to our Destination Angler podcast website. We'll put those pictures of Brett's top fly picks on our Facebook page. And folks, thank you for listening. And Brett, thanks for being on the podcast. I wish you just the best of luck.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, your biology adventures, your family adventures, and your fly fishing adventures. And folks, don't forget, you can join in the conversation with our Facebook group called the Destination Angler Connection. And feel free to email me with any comments and suggestions at shaig50@gmail.com. That's shaigh50@gmail. And as always, our music is by our Brothers Fountain, a great little band out of Colorado. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you again next week.
Well, I'll go from the land to the shining sea. But I know there's more to life than what the eye can see.